October 13th, 1793. The crisp autumn air in Paris carries a distinct metallic tension as a heavy tumbril wagon rattles across the cobblestones toward the Place de la Révolution. Seated inside, bound and stripped of every vestige of royal splendor, is a man whose name once commanded the absolute obedience of 26 million subjects. Stripped of his title, addressed merely as Citizen Louis Capet, he faces the sharp gleam of the guillotine. When the executioner's blade falls, it does not merely sever a life, it severs an entire epoch of European history, ending a 1,000-year divine right of kings in France. Yet, the man beneath the blade was never born to be the absolute master of this fate. How did a shy, bookish, chronically hesitant teenager who would rather have spent his days tinkering with locks, hunting, and studying geography find himself dragged to the scaffold, presiding over the total collapse of the Bourbon dynasty? To trace the tragedy of Louis XVI, one must look back to the immense, suffocating shadow cast by his grandfather, Louis XV, and the glittering inheritance left behind by the Sun King. Louis Auguste, born in 1754, was a sickly, overlooked child. While his charismatic older brother was showered with praise and groomed as the definitive heir, Louis was pushed to the background, plump, quiet, prone to stuttering, and deeply insecure. When his parents and older brother tragically died of tuberculosis within a span of a few short years, the heavy burden of the crown suddenly plummeted onto the shoulders of a 15-year-old boy who felt entirely unready to rule. He reportedly burst into tears, crying out, "O God, guide us and protect us. We are too young to reign." That psychological fragility defined his early reign. Crowned in 1774 alongside his brilliant Austrian-born wife Marie Antoinette, whose marriage was engineered as a political alliance between France and the Habsburgs, Louis stepped into a kingdom sliding toward fiscal bankruptcy. France was saddled with astronomical national debt accumulated through generations of continental wars, culminating in the ruinous 7 Years' War. Instead of aggressively cutting court expenditures or reforming a wildly corrupt and regressive taxation system, where the wealthy nobility and clergy paid almost nothing while the starving peasantry bore the entire financial weight, the young king lacked the political spine. He constantly wavered between opposing factions of reform-minded ministers and entrenched aristocrats who fought tooth and nail to protect their feudal privileges. Compounding his domestic paralysis was his foreign policy obsession, revenge against Great Britain. Bitter over the loss of French colonial territories in North America, Louis made the fateful decision to bankroll and militarily support the American revolutionaries. French soldiers, naval fleets, and millions of livres poured across the Atlantic. While this intervention successfully humiliated the British and helped birth the United States, it delivered the final fatal blow to the French treasury. The state was forced to borrow at catastrophic interest rates, and the returning soldiers brought back radical Enlightenment ideas about liberty, representation, and the illegitimacy of absolute monarchy, ideas that would soon be turned against the French crown itself. By the late 1780s, nature itself seemed to conspire against the king. A succession of devastating hailstorms, unseasonably harsh winters, and severe droughts ruined agricultural harvests across France. The price of bread, the absolute staple of survival for the working class, skyrocketed by over 50%. Riots broke out in provincial towns and the suburbs of Paris. Starving mothers and desperate laborers openly cursed the monarchy, while tales of the exorbitant luxuries enjoyed by Marie Antoinette at the Petit Trianon fueled toxic public resentment. Though the queen was often unfairly scapegoated, the royal couple lived in a detached bubble of court etiquette, oblivious to the boiling rage festering just outside the gates of Versailles. With the treasury completely empty and creditors refusing to lend another penny, Louis XVI was forced to take a step no French monarch had taken in 175 years. He convoked the Estates General. This medieval assembly represented the three social classes, the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners known as the Third Estate. It was designed as an advisory board to rubber stamp new taxes, but the delegates of the Third Estate, fueled by Enlightenment philosophy and representing 98% of the population, demanded sweeping structural voting reforms. When the king and the conservative aristocracy resisted, the delegates took a revolutionary leap, breaking away to form the National Assembly and swearing not to disperse until they had written a formal constitution for France. Instead of acting decisively, Louis retreated into his usual pattern of hesitation. He surrounded Paris with mercenary regiments of foreign troops, sparking widespread panic that the king intended to crush the newly formed assembly by force. That paranoia erupted on July 14, 1789, when an enraged Parisian mob stormed the Bastille fortress, a hated symbol of royal tyranny, political imprisonment, and absolute power. The guards were overwhelmed, the governor's head was paraded on a pike, and the French Revolution was officially born. Louis, woken late that night at Versailles, famously asked his aide if it was a revolt. The aide replied, "No, sire, it is a revolution." Events quickly accelerated beyond royal control. In October 1789, a massive, freezing crowd of thousands of working-class Parisian women, infuriated by ongoing bread shortages and royal recalcitrance, marched all the way to Versailles. They breached the palace gates, killed several royal bodyguards, and forced the king, queen, and their children to abandon their ancestral home and move under virtual house arrest to the Tuileries Palace in the heart of revolutionary Paris. The king was no longer the absolute ruler of France. He was now a hostage of the capital's radicalized populace. For nearly 2 years, Louis played a dangerous double game. Publicly, he accepted the constitutional monarchy, signed various decrees, and appeared before cheering crowds wearing the revolutionary tricolor cockade. Privately, he was miserable, humiliated, and deeply conflicted over whether compromising with the revolution meant violating his sacred coronation oath to God. Urged on by Marie Antoinette and royalist loyalists, he began secret correspondences with foreign monarchs, hoping to orchestrate a military rescue. The tipping point arrived on the night of June 20th, 1791. Disguised as a humble Russian servant and his family traveling under false papers, the royal family slipped out of the Tuileries Palace in a heavily loaded carriage and fled eastward toward the border, hoping to reach loyal royalist troops. But the escape was plagued by amateurish delays, bad timing, and poor disguises. In the small town of Varennes, just miles from safety, the local postmaster, Jean-Baptiste Drouet, recognized the king's profile from an assignat banknote. The alarm was raised, the National Guard intercepted the carriage, and the disgraced royals were hauled back to Paris in agonizing silence through hostile, jeering crowds. The flight to Varennes destroyed whatever lingering affection or trust the public retained for Louis XVI. To the revolutionaries, his escape attempt was definitive proof of high treason. He had abandoned his country in its hour of crisis to invite a foreign invasion. Radical political clubs, particularly the Jacobins, led by figures like Maximilien Robespierre and Georges Danton, began openly demanding the total abolition of the monarchy and the trial of the king. By the summer of 1792, as foreign Austro-Prussian armies invaded France and issued the Brunswick Manifesto threatening utter destruction to Paris if the royal family was harmed, popular fury boiled over. On August 10, 1792, an armed insurrection stormed the Tuileries Palace. The Swiss Guard was massacred defending the sovereign, and the Legislative Assembly suspended the king's powers. Shortly thereafter, the newly elected National Convention officially declared France a republic. Imprisoned in the grim medieval fortress of the Temple, Louis was stripped of his royal titles and formally indicted under the newly minted name Citizen Louis Capet. The trial opened in December 1792. Discovered hidden inside the Tuileries was the Armoire de Fer, a secret iron chest containing explosive documents proving Louis's financial support of counter-revolutionary pamphleteers and his secret communications with foreign enemies. Despite his defense lawyers arguing that his constitutional inviolability protected him from prosecution, the verdict was a foregone conclusion in a radicalized state fighting for its survival. On January 15, 1793, the deputies of the convention voted unanimously on his guilt. 2 days later, after intense, agonizing debates, a narrow majority voted for his execution without reprieve. When told of his impending death, Louis maintained a quiet, stoic dignity, spending his final hours praying with a refractory priest, writing a deeply emotional last will and testament, and bidding a heartbreaking farewell to his weeping wife and children. On the freezing morning of January 21st, he was driven through streets lined with tens of thousands of silent, heavily armed National Guardsmen to the Place de la Révolution. As he mounted the scaffold, he attempted to speak his final words to the crowd, declaring his innocence and forgiving his enemies, but the drumming of the Revolutionary Guards abruptly drowned out his voice. Moments later, the heavy blade fell. The shy, indecisive boy who had inherited a buckling empire became the tragic sacrifice to a new modern era, leaving behind a radicalized nation poised to plunge Europe into decades of total war.